The dawn broke on September 12, 1942, over Charter Towers Airfield in Queensland, Australia. The air shimmered with heat rising from the runway as a Douglas A-20 Havoc, a nimble light bomber, rumbled towards a temporary hangar. This structure, fashioned from corrugated iron and sheer grit, held a 43-year-old man whose hands bore the marks of grease and whose eyes blazed with an unyielding fire. His name was Paul Irvin Gunn, known to all as Pappy, and in 6 hours, his modified aircraft was slated to assault a Japanese stronghold in Buna, New Guinea. If his ingenious alterations proved successful, American bombers would finally possess the capability to inflict significant damage on Japanese naval vessels and ground defenses. Conversely, should his efforts falter, lives would be lost, and this visionary pilot might be branded a fool who squandered vital time and resources on a harebrained scheme. Yet, Pappy Gunn's mind was far from contemplating defeat. His thoughts were consumed by his wife and their 4 children, held captive over 1,700 miles to the north in a Japanese internment camp at Santo Tomas in Manila. He recalled witnessing a convoy of Japanese transports slip past American patrols the previous week, an escape facilitated by the inability of existing aircraft to engage effectively at low altitudes with sufficient speed and destructive power. He pondered how a bomber designed for high-altitude ordnance delivery could be reimagined into a force the Japanese had never encountered, a low-level strafing machine capable of obliterating ships, neutralizing anti-aircraft fire, and transforming enemy airfields into infernos. This is not a narrative of advanced technology triumphing over military challenges. Instead, it's the account of a blacksmith's son from Arkansas, armed with little more than salvaged fighter planes, basic tools, and an urgent desire to end a conflict that held his family hostage. He would transform America's medium bombers into the most dreaded gunships in the Pacific, demonstrating how ingenuity overcame conventional engineering. It's the story of how necessity birthed an innovation that would shape close air support for generations, and how one man's righteous anger forged aluminum and firearms into a weapon instrumental in shattering the Japanese Empire. If you are finding this detailed exploration of events captivating, please consider subscribing and sharing your location in the comments below. The North American B-25 Mitchell bomber was never conceived as a gunship. Upon its initial production at the North American Aviation Plant in Englewood, California in 1941, it was designed as a medium bomber, a workhorse intended to carry substantial bomb loads efficiently and accurately from moderate altitudes, specifically between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. Equipped with twin Wright R2600 engines, measuring 64 feet from nose to tail, boasting a wingspan of 95 feet, and weighing 33,000 pounds fully loaded, it achieved a maximum speed of 230 miles per hour and a range of 1,300 miles. The Mitchell was a robust and dependable aircraft, named in honor of Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell, the charismatic advocate for air power who, in 1921, demonstrably proved that aircraft could sink battleships. It typically carried a crew of 6: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, and 2 gunners. Its defensive armament consisted of a tail gun, a dorsal turret, and a ventral gun tray that required almost a full minute to deploy, during which time a Zero fighter could execute 3 attack passes. The remotely operated tailguns posed as much a hazard to the Mitchell's own vertical stabilizers and engine nacelles as they did to enemy aircraft. This bomber was thoroughly conventional, extensively tested, and ultimately insufficient for the nature of the war being waged in the Southwest Pacific in 1942. In the dense jungles and scattered islands of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, altitude was a luxury few American bomber crews could afford. The jungle environment rendered medium-level bombing largely ineffective. While a bombardier might spot a ship, an airfield, or a supply depot from 10,000 feet, accurately striking it through the thick canopy, while under constant threat from anti-aircraft fire and harassing Zero fighters, was an entirely different proposition. Bombs released from such heights dispersed widely. Many vanished into the jungle without detonating, while others landed harmlessly in the water. Those that did reach their intended targets often inflicted minimal damage, lacking the precision to hit critical vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Japanese supply convoys operated nightly, sustaining isolated garrisons, reinforcing precarious positions, and delivering troops and materiel throughout their vast Pacific dominion. While American submarines inflicted casualties, they could not be everywhere. The U.S. Army Air Forces desperately needed a method to interdict these convoys from the air, denying the Japanese the freedom of movement that geography seemed to afford them. They required aircraft capable of flying at low altitudes, loitering over targets, suppressing defensive fire, and launching devastating attacks against shipping and shore installations. The unfortunate reality was that no such aircraft existed in the American inventory by mid-1942. Fighters such as the P-40 Warhawk and the P-39 era Cobra possessed the speed and agility for low-level assaults, but they lacked the necessary range, firepower, and survivability for sustained operations against heavily defended objectives. Heavy bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress, were designed for high-altitude strategic bombing, not for close-range ship attacks. Light bombers, such as the Douglas A-20 Havoc, showed potential, but they were in critically short supply. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was becoming more available, but it was engineered for an entirely different mission profile. What the 5th Air Force truly required was an aircraft that merged the range and payload capacity of a medium bomber with the forward-firing firepower of a fighter. They needed something that could approach targets at wave-top height, suppress enemy anti-aircraft fire with sustained bursts of heavy machine gun rounds, and then either shred the target with strafing runs or employ skip bombing tactics, releasing 500-pound bombs at such low altitudes that they would bounce across the water like stones before striking the vulnerable hull below the waterline. They needed a gunship, and they needed it within weeks, not months or years. Every week of delay translated to additional Japanese supply missions, further reinforced enemy positions, and more American and Australian soldiers falling in jungle battles where air support was the decisive factor between survival and annihilation. Enter Major General George C. Kenney, who arrived in Australia in August 1942 to assume command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific Theater. Kenny, 53 years old and a veteran of the First World War, had no patience for conventional approaches when those approaches were leading to the loss of his men. He immediately embarked on a tour of his dispersed bases, actively seeking solutions to the tactical problems that were decimating his bomber force. At Charter Towers Airfield, south of Townsville in Queensland, he discovered something remarkable. Amidst the sweltering heat, a grease-stained former Navy pilot in his early 40s was diligently working within a makeshift shelter on a Douglas A-20 Havoc, repurposing it from a light bomber into something entirely new. Paul Irvin Gunn, affectionately called Pappy by everyone who knew him due to his advanced age of 43 by Air Force standards, was unlike any officer Kenny had ever encountered. Gunn had enlisted in the Navy in 1918, serving for 21 years as an aviation mechanic and then a naval aviation pilot, retiring in December 1939 as a chief petty officer. He was an expert in low-level flight, a gifted aircraft mechanic, and possessed an intuitive understanding of airplanes, akin to a blacksmith's mastery of iron, capable of shaping them with his own hands. Following his retirement from the Navy, Gunn relocated his family to the Philippines, where he co-founded Philippine Airlines, piloting 5 privately owned Beechcraft aircraft on cargo and passenger routes across the archipelago. When the Japanese launched their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Gunn was in Manila. Major General Louis Brereton, commander of the Far East Air Force, promptly requisitioned Philippine Airlines aircraft and personnel. Gunn was sworn into the Army Air Forces as a captain, given command of an improvised air transport squadron, and tasked with evacuating military personnel from Japanese-occupied territory. For the subsequent 6 weeks, Gunn undertook numerous missions into hostile airspace in unarmed, unarmored Beechcraft planes, extracting pilots, delivering essential supplies to beleaguered troops on Bataan, and executing feats of low-level flight that earned him a reputation as either the bravest or the most reckless pilot in the Philippines. He survived a crash landing in a coconut plantation after being shot down once, and was subsequently rescued by the plantation owner, a man he had previously flown as a passenger during peacetime. Eventually, in late January 1942, Gunn piloted one of the last aircraft to depart the Philippines for Australia, safely escorting key personnel. However, he was forced to leave behind his wife, Clara Louise, and their 4 children, Nathaniel, Connie, Julie, and Paul Jr. They were trapped in Manila when the city fell. On January 20th, 1942, Japanese forces rounded up American and Allied civilians, interring them at the University of Santo Tomas. Pappy Gunn's family would endure 3 years as prisoners, subsisting on meager rations, subjected to harsh discipline, and slowly wasting away while he fought from Australia, unable to reach them, unable to shield them, his only recourse to inflict as much damage as possible on the Japanese in the desperate hope that hastening the war's conclusion might secure their lives. This was the man General Kenny discovered working on an A-20 in a tin shelter at Charter Towers in August 1942. When asked about his endeavor, Gunn explained that he was installing 4 50 caliber machine guns into the bombardier's nose section, replacing the transparent plexiglass with solid metal, effectively transforming the light bomber into a low-level strafer capable of suppressing anti-aircraft fire and devastating enemy aircraft and installations. Kenny inquired about the source of the machine guns. Gunn revealed he was salvaging them from wrecked fighter planes scattered across Australian airfields, P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Airacobras that were beyond repair but possessed functional weaponry. The 5th Air Force's supply of 50 caliber machine guns was severely limited throughout the Southwest Pacific. There were never enough. Thus, Gunn acted as any competent mechanic would. He improvised. He located derelicts, salvaged weapons, fabricated mounting brackets, tested, adjusted, and tested again. He made it work because making it work was the only viable option. General Kenny was profoundly impressed. This seasoned aviator grasped a fundamental truth that often eluded staff officers in their comfortable offices: that victory in war is not achieved by adhering to procedures alone, but by effectively solving problems, and that the most ingenious solutions frequently emerge from individuals intimately familiar with their tools, capable of adapting them to novel purposes. Kenny immediately assigned Gunn to his personal staff as a special projects officer, entrusting him with a straightforward directive: convert more aircraft, enhance their lethality, and do so with urgency. Gunn threw himself into his work with a ferocity that astonished everyone around him. He was not merely an engineer tackling a technical challenge. He was a father driven by a desperate need to rescue his family by shortening the war. Every aircraft he modified, every sortie it flew, every Japanese vessel sunk or airfield neutralized brought the war's end closer to Manila, closer to Santo Tomas, closer to his wife and children. Fury serves as a potent motivator, desperation, an even more formidable engineer. By early September 1942, Gunn had successfully converted several A-20s into formidable strafers. The modifications, though rudimentary, were highly effective. 4 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns were mounted in the nose with solid metal panels replacing the bombardier's transparent station. Additional ammunition storage was incorporated, and the bomb racks were adapted to carry parachute fragmentation bombs. These were small bombs deployed with parachutes, allowing the attacking aircraft to evade the blast radius even at extremely low altitudes. The parafrag bombs would descend gently over enemy airfields and installations, detonating above parked aircraft and fuel depots, showering them with incandescent fragments and white phosphorus that ignited everything they touched. The converted A-20s saw their combat debut on September 12, 1942, during a raid targeting the Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. The results far surpassed all expectations. Flying at wavetop and treetop levels, the strafers roared in before enemy defenses could react, suppressing anti-aircraft fire with torrents of 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds, then unleashing their parafrag bombs directly onto the target. Japanese fighters caught on the ground exploded in fiery bursts. Fuel depots detonated and buildings were reduced to rubble. The lightly constructed Japanese aircraft, designed for agility and range rather than armor, were torn apart by half-inch bullets, traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The Strafers climbed away, leaving behind a panorama of destruction that resembled the wrath of an avenging deity. General Kenny promptly ordered Gunn to apply the same principles to the B-25 Mitchell. This presented a greater challenge. The A-20 was a light bomber, relatively compact and simpler to modify. The B-25, a medium bomber, was larger and more complex, with distinct aerodynamic and structural considerations. Adding weight to the nose of an aircraft profoundly impacts its center of gravity, thereby affecting its stability and handling characteristics. The installation of guns generates recoil forces that the airframe must absorb. Modifying a bomber designed for high-altitude level flight to execute low-level strafing runs entailed accepting risks that no engineer at North American Aviation would have sanctioned. However, Pappy Gunn did not work for North American Aviation. He answered to General Kenny, and General Kenny was unconcerned with manual limitations. His focus was on what needed to be accomplished. Gunn received assistance from Jack Fox, a technical representative from North American Aviation stationed at Charter Towers. Fox forwarded drawings of Gunn's proposed modifications back to the factory in Long Beach, California. Nevertheless, there were insufficient B-25s in the theater to dedicate any to experimental modifications at that juncture. The initial B-25s were urgently required for conventional bombing missions. Gunn would have to await the arrival of more aircraft before he could commence the conversions that would define the remainder of the Pacific Air War. This waiting period was agonizing. Each passing day meant continued supply runs, more reinforcements, further casualties among American soldiers in jungle combat, and prolonged confinement for his family in the internment camp. Gunn himself participated in combat missions, testing his A-20 conversions, refining tactics, and validating the concept. He accumulated more combat hours and enemy kills than nearly any other man in the theater, earning 2 distinguished flying crosses, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and ultimately 9 Purple Hearts, signifying 9 separate wounds. 9 times he bled in combat and continued to fly. By late 1942, B-25 Mitchells were arriving in Australia in greater numbers. General Kenny authorized Gunn to initiate the conversion program. Working with a small team of mechanics, Gunn established a B-25 conversion center in Townsville. The modifications were extensive. The transparent bombardier's nose was removed and replaced with solid metal panels. 8 .50 caliber Browning machine guns were installed, 4 in the nose and 4 in underwing blisters or fuselage pods. Some aircraft received additional armament. 2 more forward-firing guns were added in cheek blisters on either side of the nose, bringing the total forward-firing armament to 10 or even 12 heavy machine guns. The dorsal turrets were augmented with guns that could be synchronized to fire forward with the fixed guns, enabling some B-25s to bring 14 .50 caliber machine guns to bear on a target simultaneously. 14 .50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 850 rounds per minute, with each round a half-inch diameter armor-piercing projectile traveling at 2,900 feet per second. 14 guns equated to 11,900 rounds per minute, nearly 200 rounds per second, creating a cone of destruction so dense that anything caught within its path simply disintegrated. These conversions were time-consuming, requiring weeks, not overnight miracles. It was not a single desperate night of improvisation. but a sustained program of modification and rigorous testing. Each aircraft had to be meticulously modified to ensure structural integrity. The guns required precise alignment and testing. Ammunition feed systems needed installation and debugging. Pilots had to learn new tactics for an aircraft that now handled differently, with added nose weight, demanding revised flying techniques to compensate for the mass of weaponry and ammunition. However, the results, when they materialized, were devastating. The first squadron of Strafer B-25s was combat-ready by early 1943. They would prove their mettle in the most dramatic fashion conceivable, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. This engagement stands as one of the most one-sided victories in naval aviation history, a battle that would unequivocally demonstrate that Pappy Gunn's jury-rigged gunships had irrevocably altered the course of the Pacific War. In the initial days of March 1943, intelligence reports reached General Kenny's headquarters in Port Moresby, New Guinea. A Japanese convoy was assembling at Rabaul, comprising 8 transport ships laden with nearly 7,000 troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. Their intended destination was Lae, New Guinea, where Japanese forces were under pressure from Allied advances. This convoy represented a colossal reinforcement effort, sufficient troops to tip the balance of the ground campaign and enough supplies to sustain Japanese resistance for months. General Kenny understood the imperative. The convoy had to be annihilated, not merely damaged or delayed, but utterly destroyed. Every ship, every soldier, every ton of supplies. For if those 7,000 troops reached Lae, American and Australian soldiers would pay the price in blood on jungle battlefields, where the enemy already held every conceivable advantage conferred by terrain. Kenny possessed the necessary aircraft. He had B-17 Flying Fortresses for high-altitude bombing, B-25 Mitchells, including both conventional bombers and Pappy Gunn's converted strafers, and A-20 Havocs, similarly modified. He also had P-38 Lightning fighters for escort and strafing. And he had a novel tactic, tested in smaller engagements, but never against a target of this magnitude, this level of defense, or this critical importance: skip bombing. The concept, though simple in theory, was terrifying in execution. A bomber would approach its target at an extremely low altitude, typically 200 feet or less, sometimes as low as 50 feet above the waves. At point-blank range, perhaps a quarter mile from the target, the bomber would release its bombs with a slight upward trajectory. The bombs would then skip across the water like flat stones tossed by children on a pond. Except these were 500-pound projectiles filled with high explosives. They would skip once, twice, then slam into the ship's hull at or below the waterline, precisely where naval architects know a vessel is most vulnerable. The resulting explosion would breach the hull, allowing seawater to flood in, and the ship would sink. However, skip bombing demanded that pilots fly directly at heavily armed warships through intense anti-aircraft fire. They had to fly low enough that a single misjudgment would result in a catastrophic impact with the water. They had to fly slow enough for enemy gunners to acquire and aim. They had to fly close enough that if a bomb detonated prematurely, the attacking aircraft would be caught in its own blast radius. This maneuver required nerves of steel and flawless timing. It demanded aircraft capable of suppressing enemy anti-aircraft fire long enough for the bomber to release its ordnance and escape. It required Pappy Gunn's Strafer B-25s. If you find this narrative compelling, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. Your support enables us to continue producing in-depth content of this nature. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea commenced on March 2, 1943. The Japanese convoy departed Rabaul, steaming southwest through the Solomon Sea towards the Huon Gulf and Leh. Australian reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy and maintained surveillance, reporting its position and course. General Kenny mobilized his air groups. Bombers and fighters took off from bases across New Guinea and northern Australia. The weather was abysmal, characterized by heavy clouds and rain squalls, severely limiting visibility. However, this inclement weather inadvertently worked in the Allies' favor, allowing aircraft to approach undetected until the final moments. The initial assaults were conventional. The initial assaults on March 2nd began with B-17 flying fortresses delivering ordnance from high altitudes. While these attacks achieved minimal direct hits, they compelled the enemy convoy to engage in constant evasive maneuvers, significantly impeding their progress. As dawn broke on March 3rd, the weather cleared, providing the ideal conditions for Kenny's daring strafing runs. Modified B-25 and A-20 aircraft descended to incredibly low altitudes, their propellers whipping up spray from the ocean surface. They advanced in tightly packed formations, a formidable aerial phalanx hurtling towards the convoy at 200 miles per hour. The Japanese vessels detected their approach, and anti-aircraft batteries erupted in a hail of defensive fire. 20mm and 25mm cannons unleashed torrents of explosive shells, while larger 40mm guns arced volleys towards the attackers. The sky became a chaotic canvas of tracer rounds, bursting shells, and the acrid smoke of a desperate defense. Then, the strafers unleashed their own fury. Each aircraft bristled with 14 50 caliber machine guns, and with multiple planes attacking concurrently, thousands of rounds per second hammered into the Japanese ships. The impact was catastrophic. Anti-aircraft crews were mown down where they stood, their protective shields perforated like paper. Bridge windows imploded and superstructures were shredded. The armor-piercing ammunition tore through light plating, ricocheted off steel bulkheads, splintered wooden structures, ignited fires, and detonated stored ordnance. The surviving Japanese gunners found themselves pinned down, unable to aim or return fire, forced to seek cover as a relentless storm of bullets pulverized their surroundings. Seizing this critical window of suppressed fire, the skip-bombing B-25s and conventional Mitchells released their payloads. 500-pound bombs skipped across the water surface. While not every bomb found its mark, warfare is inherently imperfect. Many did, slamming into the hulls below the waterline. They detonated with the concussive force of half a ton of high explosive concentrated against the most vulnerable sections of the ships. Steel plates buckled, welds ruptured, and the sea surged inward. The transport ships, laden with troops and vital supplies, proved exceptionally susceptible. Unlike warships, they lacked armored hulls or sophisticated damage control systems. Upon impact and with their hulls breached, they began to sink immediately. Troops trapped in flooded compartments below decks had no escape. The vessel settled lower in the water, listed precariously to one side, then either capsized or broke apart, vanishing beneath the waves. The destroyers fared better, their design allowing them to absorb more punishment. However, even they could not withstand the coordinated assault. One destroyer was struck amidships by a bomb, breaking in two. Another was so riddled by .50 caliber fire that it became uncontrollable, drifting in circles while fires raged unchecked. A third destroyer, attempting to rescue survivors from a sinking transport, was caught by the strafers and transformed into a floating inferno. The engagement raged for 3 full days. Every attempt by the Japanese to rescue survivors was met by the swift appearance of Allied aircraft. Every damaged vessel attempting to limp away was relentlessly attacked. The Strafer B-25s, functioning like a pack of wolves, operated in seamless coordination with conventional bombers, fighter escorts, and reconnaissance aircraft that identified targets. They employed new parachute fragmentation bombs, dropping them onto the decks of destroyers, incapacitating exposed personnel and sowing chaos. They strafed lifeboats and debris fields, not out of malice, but because any rescued survivor was a soldier who would rejoin the fight on New Guinea's battlefields. By March 4th, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea had concluded. The results were astounding. All 8 transport ships had been sunk, along with 4 destroyers, and 3 others suffered severe damage. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers perished in the sinking vessels or the unforgiving waters. Fewer than 1,000 reached land, and the majority of those were immediately captured or eliminated by Allied forces. The Japanese reinforcement effort had been utterly annihilated. The supplies intended to sustain the Japanese garrison at Rabaul for months lay at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses were comparatively light, 4 aircraft shot down, with 13 aircrew killed or missing. This engagement represented a pivotal moment in aerial warfare, and at its heart, enabling this decisive victory, were the modified B-25s equipped with Pappy's guns, the Strafers. These aircraft suppressed defensive fire, allowing the skip bombers to approach and ultimately tore Japanese ships apart with concentrated machine gun fire. General Kenny immediately authorized further modifications. Word of the Strafers' effectiveness spread rapidly throughout the theater, prompting other air forces to request similar conversions. The 13th Air Force dispatched B-25s to Brisbane for modification, and depot engineers at Tsuneotoka began the work. The 10th Air Force in India also adopted these modifications. What had begun as a desperate improvisation in a simple tin hangar in Queensland evolved into a standard operating procedure across the Pacific. However, the narrative did not solely revolve around tactical triumphs. North American aviation in California had been meticulously observing these developments. Factory representatives transmitted reports detailing the gun modifications, and engineers in Long Beach studied the results, subsequently integrating these innovations into new production models. In late 1943, North American introduced the B-25G variant. The original transparent nose was replaced by a solid metal section housing a 75mm EL-4 cannon, essentially a tank gun mounted on an aircraft. This weapon fired 3-pound high-explosive shells, capable of engaging ships from 2 miles away and sinking smaller vessels with a single direct hit. Complementing the cannon were 45 caliber machine guns. The concept was revolutionary, but its execution proved problematic. The 75 millimeter cannon generated tremendous recoil, causing the entire aircraft to shudder with each firing. Pilots struggled to maintain stable flight, and the manually loaded cannon was slow to reload, quickly depleting its limited ammunition supply. After only 7 weeks of combat, units equipped with the B-25G had exhausted all their 75 millimeter ammunition. The cannon-armed Mitchells represented an intriguing experiment, but ultimately proved less effective than Pappy Gunn's simpler, more direct solution: an increased number of machine guns. The B-25H model followed, with over 1,000 aircraft produced, featuring an even greater concentration of machine guns. The 75 millimeter cannon was replaced by a lighter 14 gun configuration: 8 in the nose, 4 in side blisters, and 2 in the dorsal turret. Some H models also carried rockets, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets that could be fired in devastating salvos. Yet, the ultimate embodiment of Pappy Gunn's vision emerged with the B-25J, introduced in 1944. North American manufactured over 4,000 J models. While many were delivered with transparent noses for conventional bombing, the Air Depot system developed conversion kits offering the Strafer nose option. When a J model was converted into a Strafer, it was equipped with 1850 caliber machine guns, 8 in the nose, 4 in fuselage pods, 2 in the dorsal turret, 1 in each waist position, and 2 in the tail. 14 of these 18 guns fired directly forward, resulting in a combined rate of fire of 15,300 rounds per minute, exceeding 250 rounds per second. A single B-25J Strafer, firing all its forward guns, simultaneously unleashed more lead into the air than an entire infantry company could with their rifles. The effect on targets was not merely destruction, but disintegration. These heavily armed Mitchells continued to wreak havoc on Japanese targets throughout New Guinea, the Philippines, and Okinawa until the war's end. They strafed airfields, obliterating parked aircraft. They attacked bridges, severing vital supply lines. They hunted coastal barges and small vessels. They provided indispensable close air support to ground troops with devastating effect. Their success was so profound that captured enemy documents warned Japanese forces against attacking when the Strafers were overhead, describing them as weapons useless against the aircraft and inferring that any engagement would only further enrage these monsters. The Strafer crews developed their own distinctive tactics and cultivated a fearsome reputation. They flew low enough to observe the expressions on enemy soldiers' faces. They approached from unpredictable vectors, utilizing mountains, valleys, and coastlines to mask their maneuvers until the last possible moment. They operated with exceptional teamwork, with one aircraft suppressing enemy fire while another delivered the decisive blow. They were simultaneously feared and hated, and utterly merciless. Behind every one of these formidable aircraft lay Pappy Gunn's intense fury, meticulously channeled into engineering and transformed into unparalleled lethality. Major Gunn, promoted for his groundbreaking innovations and distinguished combat record, was eventually reassigned to the United States to oversee the factory production of the new B-25 variants at North American aviation. This represented a significant acknowledgment of his contributions, recognizing that his battlefield modifications had proven so successful they warranted integration into standard production. However, Gunn harbored no desire for accolades. His sole objective was to return to the Pacific theater, engage the enemy, and hasten the war's conclusion, a war that held his family captive. He returned to the Pacific as soon as circumstances permitted, continuing to fly combat missions and undertake risks that caused his commanders considerable anxiety. In late 1944, a Japanese bombing raid on Leyte in the Philippines caught him on the ground. He sustained injuries, his ninth Purple Heart, severe enough to necessitate his removal from active combat. The war continued without him, but by this point, the Strafer program he had pioneered had become so deeply entrenched in Pacific air operations that it no longer required his direct involvement. In February 1945, American forces liberated Manila. The fighting was brutal, house to house, building to building, against fanatical Japanese defenders who preferred death to surrender. On February 3rd, American troops reached the University of Santo Tomas. They discovered over 3,000 internees, emaciated, ill and traumatized by 3 years of captivity. Among them were Clara Louise Gunn and her 4 children. Pappy Gunn was finally reunited with his family. They were alive, though severely malnourished, deeply traumatized, and forever scarred by their ordeal, but alive. The war he had fought so desperately to shorten, the modifications he had engineered, the missions he had flown, the Japanese lives he had taken, all of it culminated in this single, profound moment. His family had survived. The Philippines were liberated. The war ground relentlessly towards its inevitable conclusion. Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn retired from the Army Air Forces on June 30, 1948, medically retired due to his accumulated combat wounds. He returned to the Philippines to help re-establish Philippine Airlines, the company he had co-founded before the war. The airline expanded, offering flights across the South Pacific and becoming a major regional carrier. Gunn flew again, not in the theater of war, but in the service of commerce, transporting passengers and cargo instead of ordnance and fury. On October 11, 1957, Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn perished when his chartered Beech 18 aircraft crashed during a storm over the Philippines. He was 57 years old. He had survived 21 years in the Navy, 5 grueling years of combat in the Pacific War, endured 9 combat wounds, faced countless close calls, and endured the loss of nearly everything he held dear during the dark years of his family's imprisonment. A storm over the islands he loved ultimately claimed him. However, his legacy endured. The Strafer concept he pioneered did not die with him. During the Korean War, modified B-25s provided close air support, employing the very same tactics Gunn had developed. The principle of heavy forward-firing armament on a stable platform became doctrine. In the 1960s, as the United States began developing gunships for Vietnam, engineers revisited Pappy Gunn's work. They meticulously studied his modifications and grasped his fundamental insight that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the newest or most technologically advanced, but the one that delivers the greatest firepower precisely where it is needed. The AC-47 Spooky, the first modern gunship, utilized side-firing guns and a pylon turn, a different approach than Gunn's forward-firing strafers. Nevertheless, it was born from the same understanding that transport and bomber aircraft could be transformed into devastating gunships. The AC-130 Spectre, still operational today with its 105mm howitzers and sophisticated targeting systems, is a direct descendant of Gunn's vision. The concept involved taking an aircraft designed for one purpose, modifying it for another, and creating a weapon so effective it fundamentally altered the nature of warfare. Every piece of Air Force close air support doctrine written since the 1940s implicitly or explicitly acknowledges that Pappy Gunn was correct, that desperation can indeed breed innovation, that field modifications can outpace factory designs, and that the side willing to improvise to break established rules and to transform its tools into weapons its enemies have never encountered holds a distinct advantage that mere technology alone cannot provide. The irony inherent in this story is profound and multi-layered. A bomber designed for high-altitude ordnance delivery became a low-level strafer. A former Navy pilot, retired and managing a civilian airline, emerged as one of the war's most innovative weapons designers. An aircraft modification program, born from desperate necessity and salvaged parts, laid the groundwork for gunship doctrine, utilized for 80 years. A man fighting to save his family inadvertently contributed to the destruction of an empire. And perhaps the most poignant irony of all, the B-25 Mitchell, so dramatically transformed by Pappy Gunn, was never intended to be a close air support aircraft. Its original purpose was to deliver bombs from medium altitudes to operate in a safe, orthodox, and conventional manner. But orthodoxy rarely wins wars. Innovation does. Desperation does. Fury, meticulously channeled into engineering, does. On the morning of September 12, 1942, Pappy Gunn's modified A-20 attacked Buna. The raid was a resounding success, exceeding all expectations. Yet, Gunn did not celebrate. He was already contemplating his next modification, his next improvement, his next innovation. Because every day the war continued meant another day his family remained in that concentration camp. Every sortie his aircraft flew, every enemy position his modifications neutralized, brought the end closer. Warfare is frequently depicted as a narrative of grand strategies, decisive battles, and esteemed commanders maneuvering armies like pieces on a chessboard. However, wars are also won in sweltering tin hangars in Australia, by middle-aged former sailors with grease ingrained beneath their fingernails and a burning fury in their hearts. By men who intuitively grasp that the critical difference between victory and defeat often lies in the simple willingness to examine an aircraft, a perfectly conventional, orthodox aircraft, and pose the question, what if we equipped it with more guns? Pappy Gunn asked that question. He provided his answer with a wrench and a welding torch. And the Japanese Empire paid the price in blood and steel at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. The B-25 Mitchell served in every theater of operations during the Second World War. It participated in the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, bombed targets across Europe, Africa, and Asia, and served with distinction in dozens of air forces worldwide. Nearly 10,000 were manufactured, renowned for their reliability, versatility, and the affection they inspired among their crews. But in the Southwest Pacific, the Mitchell transcended its conventional role. It became a gunship, a ship killer, a terror weapon that forced the Japanese to abandon daylight supply runs, to scatter their convoys, and to accept the unalterable reality that American air power could reach them anywhere at any time, transforming their vessels into floating cemeteries. And all of it, the innovative tactics, the ingenious modifications, the hard-won victories, can be traced back to a single individual who refused to accept the inevitability of his family's imprisonment, who refused to concede that the war would persist as long as orthodox thinking dictated, and who refused to acknowledge that aircraft were confined to the operational parameters intended by their designers. Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn did not invent the gunship overnight through a single moment of desperate improvisation. He painstakingly developed it over months of trial and error, rigorous testing and refinement, informed by combat experience and keen engineering insight. Crucially, he achieved this far more rapidly than any official program could have. He accomplished it using salvaged parts and improvised solutions driven by an absolute necessity, because every delay meant further suffering for his family, because fury, when channeled through skill and unwavering determination, is an exceptionally potent engineer. The Strafer B-25s were not flawless. They were nose-heavy, handling differently than their conventional counterparts. The recoil from firing all their guns simultaneously was so violent it noticeably slowed the aircraft. Ammunition consumption was astronomical. A Strafer could expend its entire load in mere seconds of sustained fire. Flying at such low altitudes made them vulnerable to ground fire, and crews paid the ultimate price with aircraft lost. War is never a clean, easy affair, and it always exacts a heavy toll. Yet the Strafers were effective. They irrevocably altered the course of the Pacific War. They enabled American forces to interdict Japanese supply lines, provided devastatingly precise close air support to ground troops, and destroyed enemy installations before defenders could mount an adequate response. They saved lives, American, Australian, and Allied lives, by shortening battles, by preventing reinforcements from reaching embattled garrisons, and by furnishing ground forces with the critical air support they desperately required. And every time a Strafer B-25 dived towards a Japanese vessel or airfield, every time those 14 machine guns unleashed their torrent of fire, disintegrating the target under concentrated onslaught, it was Pappy Gunn's fury made manifest. It was a father's desperation transmuted into engineering ingenuity. It was improvisation triumphing over orthodoxy. It was irrefutable proof that the most effective solutions often arise not from meticulous planning, but from the stark reality of having no other viable option. The Pacific War concluded on August 15, 1945, with Japan's surrender. Pappy Gunn's family was finally free. The Strafer B-25s had played a significant role in hastening that moment's arrival. The precise degree of acceleration is impossible to quantify. However, every vessel sunk, every airfield destroyed, every battle shortened, contributed to the cumulative pressure that ultimately compelled Japan to accept unthinkable terms. Wars are won through a confluence of factors: strategy, logistics, industrial capacity, courage, and sacrifice. Yet, they are also won by individuals who identify problems and resolutely solve them, who refuse to acknowledge limitations, and who transform ordinary tools into extraordinary weapons. Pappy Gunn was precisely such an individual. His contribution to victory was not a single, decisive engagement, but rather hundreds of modifications, thousands of sorties, and tens of thousands of enemy casualties inflicted by his aircraft. He fundamentally transformed the B-25 Mitchell bomber from a good aircraft into a great one. This transformation was not achieved through sophisticated engineering or cutting-edge technology, but by asking a simple yet profound question. What does this aircraft need to accomplish the task at hand? The answer was unequivocally more guns, more forward firing, heavy machine guns capable of suppressing enemy fire and destroying targets with overwhelming firepower. Thus, he added more guns. He integrated them using wrenches and welding torches, salvaged parts, and improvised mounts, all fueled by ingenuity born from desperation and honed through the crucible of combat experience. The outcome fundamentally reshaped the landscape of aerial warfare. 80 years later, the United States Air Force continues to operate gunships based on the very principles Pappy Gunn pioneered. The platforms have evolved, utilizing turboprop transports instead of piston-engine bombers. The armaments are more sophisticated, incorporating cannons, howitzers, and precision-guided munitions. The targeting systems employ radar, infrared sensors, and computers that would have seemed utterly miraculous to Gunn's generation. Nevertheless, the core insight remains unchanged. A properly modified transport or bomber aircraft can deliver sustained, devastating firepower against ground targets with a level of precision and intensity that other platforms cannot match. Every AC-130 gunship pilot owes a debt to Pappy Gunn. Every close air support controller directing fire from circling gunships utilizes tactics refined in the skies over New Guinea and the Bismarck Sea. Every innovation in aerial gunnery stands upon the foundation Gunn laid in a humble tin hangar in Queensland, working with hand tools and an unyielding determination. This is not a narrative of advanced technology overcoming primitive enemy equipment. The Japanese were not unsophisticated. Their aircraft were excellent, their ships well armed, and their pilots skilled and courageous. They possessed a profound understanding of warfare. However, they did not possess Pappy Gunn. They lacked a blacksmith's son from Arkansas who understood aircraft with such intimacy that he could transform them, who was desperate enough to pursue unconventional solutions, and who was furious enough to endure 18-hour workdays modifying bombers, because every moment of delay translated into another hour his family spent in captivity. The Japanese fought with bravery and skill. Their resistance was fierce, a testament to their unyielding spirit. However, their capacity for change lagged far behind the relentless evolution of their adversaries' weaponry. They found themselves incapable of devising countermeasures against strategies entirely outside their prior experience. Then, as those Strafer B-25 aircraft descended to skim the ocean's surface, unleashing a torrent of ordnance that bounced across the waves toward their vessels, all the valor and expertise they possessed proved utterly insufficient for their deliverance. We extend our gratitude for your viewership. For more in-depth analyses of historical events, please explore the additional content presented on your display at this moment. Furthermore, we encourage you to become a subscriber.